We've talked about the Colts backfield a lot this offseason, and part of that's probably because I'm a Colts fan, but also I feel like that is like it's one of the most questionable backfields in fantasy football right now, or just for general NFL fans. Like, we don't really know what's going to happen with Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor. And Jonathan Taylor is one of the hottest prospects in this draft. He's incredible. He was my number one back. Huge power. Steph, you sent me that photo of Jonathan Taylor in his Colts uni. He looks like he is like Superman in that uniform.
He looks like he ate Nick Chubb.
He probably did, but he's got power, but he's got that 4.39 speed, which is just unbelievable. He comes onto a team where he gets to run behind one of the most elite offensive lines in football. And right now, Steph, I have Jonathan Taylor around 250 carries. And I know that sounds crazy, but Marlon Mack had 247 last year. So it looks like I have Taylor at 231. I wouldn't be surprised if he did push that 250 number, though, because Mack, like I said, he had 247 last year. I think Mack is going to be the backup on this team. It's actually probably going to be similar to the Melvin Gordon, Phillip Lindsay situation we talked about. I see Marlon Mack in a similar role to Phillip Lindsay, where he's going to get, 150 or so carries in this offense, but you're just not really going to know the week that he's going to get 80 yards and a touchdown. So as far as Jonathan Taylor goes, though, I think he is definitely going to have touchdown upside on this team. I think he could easily see double-digit touchdowns behind a team that wants to run the football. Phillip Rivers is there. I think the offense is going to be improved from last season. And Taylor does have that breakaway ability. I wouldn't be surprised to see him rip off a couple 40, 50-yard touchdown runs this season. So when I look at Taylor, one of the biggest questions people have is his upside really there with Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines when he's not a receiving back? And I think Phillip Rivers is going to throw to the running back position enough where Nyheim Hines will be the primary third down back, passing downs back. But I think Taylor could see a ton of dump-offs from Phillip Rivers. Like you just said it earlier in the pod with Melvin Gordon, even though Austin Eckler was there, when Melvin Gordon came back, he was still getting 4.5 targets a game. If Jonathan Taylor sees 4 to 5 targets a game in this offense, he is going to be a top 20 running back lock this season. Phillip Rivers had 182 targets to the running back last year. Those are not all going to Nyheim Hines. Even if it's 150, those are not all going to Nyheim Hines. So, the pocket collapses. Rivers is standing there. He's not going to be able to scramble out and extend the play. So he's either going to throw it out of bounds. He's going to do what we see Phillip Rivers do a lot of time. Tom Brady does it too. Like if there's a defender closing in, he just drops straight to the ground like he just went limp and just takes the sack. Or he's just going to dump it off over the lineman to Jonathan Taylor. So we could see a lot of that this season. I'm super hyped for Taylor. According to Fantasy Pros, the Colts have the easiest schedule for running backs this year. So this could be one of those teams like we saw with the Ravens and the Niners last year, these elite running football teams. The Colts could easily get to that level this season.
If he comes in and he's the one from day one, which I think is actually a somewhat likely scenario. Like I don't think it would be crazy if Jonathan Taylor comes out in his first game and has close to 15 carries on the ground and a couple targets. Like I think that's completely reasonable.
Really quick to that point, we're going to probably talk about this a lot with some of the teams that have rookies. But what are the chances? Give me a percentage chance that Jonathan Taylor comes out week 1 for the Colts and is on the field for the first snap. It's tough with no preseason, a weird minicamp this year. That makes me a little bit concerned. But what do you think the Colts are going to do? Is that realistic?
I don't know about their first snap, but I do think they'll try to work him in over the course of the first, call it, 4 to 6 weeks of the
Early
season.
And often.
I think there's that, you kind of move the preseason over into that first 4 games, that first quarter of the fantasy season, and treat that as kind of the ramp-up period. And so for Mack, where he's going on draft boards, I actually think he could be a plug-and-play RB2 for the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season. Mack is a very good running back. I'm not going to say elite, but I was heavily invested in Mack last season as an RB2, and I was very happy with him in the weeks that I was starting him. He's coming off a year where he was top 10 in carries, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns, but still finishes the RB22 after finishing as the RB21 in 2018. Part of that is due to injury. Mack misses a few games a year over the last couple of years. He barely gets any passing work. He saw 14 receptions in 2019, 17 receptions the year prior. Maybe that check down volume, like you said, goes up with Rivers in town, but Hines and Taylor are there to split those pass-catching duties with him. So even if we expect the carries to be around 200 for Mack, which I think is a best-case scenario, that's still really not enough to be fantasy relevant on a week-to-week basis. I look at Mack as a draftable option if you take a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, maybe DeAndre Swift, because I do think they will have some very solid weeks early on in the season as Jonathan Taylor gets eased into the offense. But it's only a matter of time for Mack. The clock is ticking for him. Taylor looks like an absolute beast. I'm really excited to see what he can do. But I love the strategy of, and we'll talk about this because we'll talk about the Chiefs' backfield in a little bit. If you draft Jonathan Taylor, why not take Damian Williams as the other rookies getting eased in and Clyde Edwards-Helaire? And then vice versa. If you take Clyde Edwards-Helaire, take Marlon Mack. So that way you just have a safe option that you're plugging in as both of these rookie running backs with high draft capital are getting eased into their respective offenses. I love that type of approach this year.
Steph, so I really think in a worst-case scenario, I think you're right on Marlon Mack, by the way. I agree with you 100%. He's definitely going to have more value earlier than later. But for JT, I think in a worst-case scenario, he finishes as an RB2 this year. If it's a 50-50 or a 60-40 split in favor of Taylor, I really think he can still provide on that value and be an RB2. But, Steph, I'll ask you this. Right now, by the way, Taylor's being drafted as the RB21, so he's right at that value. Steph, if Marlon Mack, if we were to find out right now that Marlon Mack was going to miss the entire season, whether it be an opt-out, injury, whatever, where are we drafting Jonathan Taylor?
I mean, he's got to be on that cusp of an RB1. I would put him in that 15-plus range at least. I'd have to actually really dig into the numbers to see what that would look like. I could see that being as high as like an RB8 on the year.
Yep. I really think he'd be in that Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs conversation. Right. So that's the upside we're talking about here with JT, and it could even be higher than that. So the upside is huge. You're not having to take a ton of risk because there is some sort of floor here this season. So, look, I'm excited for this Colts backfield, and Jonathan Taylor, I'm taking him in a lot of places, especially if I lock up a very safe, secure RB1. I don't mind having the lottery on Jonathan Taylor as my RB2.